Dean, welcome back to This Is Horror.
Yeah, I think you named the show after my personality. It's
Well, we can neither confirm nor deny the process that we went through while naming the show, but nonetheless, the last time that we spoke to you, it was at the start of 2024. We are now approaching the end, so how has the year treated you? What have been some of the highlights or even lowlights for you?
well, I had walking pneumonia, which is not what it sounds like. You can't walk very much when you have walking pneumonia, and I'm not good with just lying around. I still managed to keep writing, and my dog had surgery. Let's just not go into the year. It wasn't all that magnificent.
Oh my goodness. No, it does not sound like a good one. And I mean, it's such a testament, though, to your productivity and your work ethic that, the first time when we were speaking to you, you said that initially you were a slacker, but now you work so hard that it's like you can give you like a brutal illness and you're still turning up to work every day.
Well, what else is there to do when you have walking pneumonia? And you can't, as it pretends, you can't walk very much because you're gasping for breath. So I can sit at my keyboard, not gasp for breath, and get some work done. Yeah, I'm beginning to think I could be an obsessive compulsive workaholic, but I haven't made a final decision quite yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's that possibility. And talking of things that you have worked on, of course, we're talking today because you've got a brand new book that came out a few weeks ago called The Forest of Lost Souls. So, I mean, let's start with the origin story of that story. When did this idea come to you? How did it come to you?
Well, sometimes you remember and sometimes you don't. But in this case, I have a very clear memory. I had written 5 books with the character Jane Hawk, and I really liked that character. And she was tough and no nonsense, highly knowledgeable about technology, police procedure, all that good stuff. And it suddenly occurred to me I would like to write another particularly strong woman who handles just about anything thrown at her, except that it wouldn't be police procedure and high technology. It would be perhaps just the opposite, a woman who lives in an isolated place, who has deep knowledge of nature, the forest around her, and would need a whole different set of skills from what Jane Hawk had. And it was interesting enough to get me started. And then, of course, she just sort of took over and ran with the story. So it's not that romantic a way to begin a novel, not that shocking or interesting, but it's how it began. And I'm glad it did because I had great fun writing it.
Yeah, and in terms of your protagonist Vida and her upbringing, I mean, she couldn't have really had a more tumultuous childhood peppered with tragedy and loss. But, you know, fortunately, despite all of this, she kind of perseveres. And I do think as well, this is a story of perseverance. This is a story of it in spite of what is thrown at you, you can persist, you can believe that there is some sort of light and hope.
And well, I also I wanted to bring into it an element of fantasy, which I rarely have ever done. Little science fiction, yes, a little horror at that. But this one also has this element of mythology in it, suggesting that all myths actually have some value in the time they were conceived. They were the way people of that era tried to explain the world to themselves. And though they might not have been correct, there is a little truth in each one. And it was the process by which we moved through the centuries gradually getting a better handle, and myth carried us through. And I wanted to sort of tie that into it. There's an element of myth surviving in our own time from everything we once believed. And she is almost an avatar of the goddess Diana of Roman legend, who was the goddess of the hunt and the moon and ran with wolves. And it's always interesting to have a heroine who runs with the wolves. I hadn't done that before, so I became absolutely fascinated with her because of that aspect of the story.
Yeah, I think because you've got so many different elements, as with many of your books, it's incredibly difficult to categorize because, I mean, you've got kind of permeating throughout it this fantasy, this almost magical quality and the myths that you mentioned. But I'd say for the first 50, 60% of the novel, that's all simmering in the background. I mean, of course, you see the white lion at the start, you meet the fortune teller, but it's then in that second half that it really comes into play. And for the first half, it's almost a small town kind of horror of crime and corruption. And by the way, we can see that your kind of point of view on power and corruption and the evils of man has not softened in the six
No,
months since we last spoke.
yeah, I haven't come to love the powerful.
No. But I mean, when you were writing that, or I suppose also when your publisher was looking at, okay, now we have to market, we have to put this on the shelf again, was this a concern that you've simultaneously written a fantasy and a small town crime novel? Perhaps you don't have this concern over 100 books into your career now.
Well, they didn't express any shock and dismay. They rolled with it pretty well. I don't think we had not a whole lot of editorial. Right now, I've delivered a book that they're trying to get their head around a little more with a little more difficulty, but we always work it out. It never occurs to me that anybody would be shocked and surprised and horrified that I've mixed things up in the wrong way, because I've been mixing things up for all these years. So it will one day stun me if they throw the book back at me and say, find another line of work. But I'll always be looking for another line of work. You never know.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic challenge. Maybe fantastic is the wrong word there. It's like, well, they haven't thrown a book back yet. What on earth can I write to have that happen? And yeah, it is good to always have a plan B. But in terms of the book that you've just delivered, I mean, as you know, we jump around in terms of topics. I'm curious as to which of your books that is. I know that you mentioned Going Home in the Dark previously. Is it that one? Is it the one after? And what is it that has made it kind of so challenging for them?
It's the one after Going Home in the Dark. Uh, it's a book called The Friend of the Family. And I think one of the things that was a challenge, and maybe I didn't pull it off entirely, I'm always open to that, is it's written as a memoir by a very unusual character. And I won't say what is unusual about that character, but it's a character who, by the age of 17, has not led a very wonderful life. And overnight, people show up in this person's life and just turn it upside down, turn it into more of a wonderful life than she could ever have imagined. But it's because it's written as a memoir, that you have to approach it all in a different way. It's not only that it's in the first person. I've done that before, but a memoir is structured differently than a novel. And it was kind of a challenge to make it feel that it genuinely was a memoir. And maybe I didn't succeed at that, and maybe I did, but right now I'm awaiting editorial notes, and then I will throw a hissy fit if there's any problem. But I hope there's not. My editor and I have never had to meet each other at dawn with pistols, so I think we'll avoid it this time as well.
Yeah, I heard that that is in fact the way that Thomas and Mercer do settle things. It is a kind of at dawn with pistols. It's a unique approach, but as you say, it's worked out okay for you because they've never had to invoke that cheeky little term in the contract.
No, and I don't have that much sympathy for other writers that it happens to. So,
But I mean, so if you've now delivered that, does that mean you're kind of working on a schedule where you've basically got two other novels that you've written when any one novel comes out? So you're two books ahead, or is this where you reveal you're three, four, or even five books ahead?
no, I'm not. No. I wish I were, but I'm not. I've got only those two awaiting publication. But I hope that in 7, 8 months I will have another one. If I ever, right now, as I mentioned off air, sorting books that have collected through my entire career, copies of my own books. And I have to dispose of some of them and keep others for sentimental reasons. But right now I'm spending all day, every day in the garage sorting books, which is it's a mixed thing. You get to see your whole career starting the day when you were an idiot who didn't know what he was doing. And you have to readdress those books, which for some obscure reason you've kept 12 copies of. And then you see where you started to do things more correctly. And it's kind of fascinating, but tedious at the same time. I sometimes feel I could turn violent at any moment if I have to spend the next 3 months at this. But sooner or later I'll get on to that next novel.
Yeah, yeah, you always give us hints that there might be some sort of violence or killing or some sense of foreboding in the future, but I do keep track of the news and nothing has happened yet that has at least been revealed, but maybe you're very good at covering it up. So,
Well, now you must remember in different interviews, I did acknowledge I had never killed a man. And later in another interview, I acknowledged I had never killed a child. So I'm pretty clear. And right now, I'll acknowledge I never killed a woman. So I'm getting pretty clear about being an innocent soul. But there may be some category of murder that is still open to me. So.
yeah, you absolutely anticipated my question about killing a woman. So, yeah, one step ahead there too. But shifting back to the Forest of Lost Souls, I mean, one of the characters that you have is the fortune teller, the seer, who predicts that Vida will have a good life despite there being, a lot of hopelessness and tragedy within it too. So it's an interesting fortune to be given. And what really separates this seer from other seers is instead of being asked to part with what you value most, it's like give me what you value least as payment. And I wondered where that idea came from.
I knew that the fortune teller was going to be uh, not a fraud, and she was not going to operate in any way that would imply that she was. And I thought, well, how do I convince the reader to take her seriously from the first appearance? And that's when the idea of her saying, I will tell you your fortune when you bring me the thing you value least. Um, and it also, uh, somewhat to my surprise, helped to really develop characters. because when they bring you what they value least, there's a story there that why do you value that least? And that story tells us something about the character, not just Vita, but there's a couple other people that have gone to that fortune teller uh, and brought what they valued least. And yeah, it worked very well. I got intrigued by that fortune teller. And I sometimes wondered what would I bring to the fortune teller that I valued least. I haven't made up my mind yet. Maybe it's just because I value everything. So I don't know. I guess money would be a basic thing. Bring her $1,000 because uh, in the long run, it's the thing that means the least. Although it is helpful that I've made a great deal of it.
To be honest, I wondered, given your current predicament, if you were just gonna bring a load of the books that you're trying to sort through. It's like, right, you can deal with that at the moment.
There you go with that. And again, you were a step ahead of me there. Yeah, I'll bring her something like 70,000 copies of old foreign language editions that I don't need more than three or four.
Yeah, see, then the seer will temporarily have to close up shop as she sorts through them all and then can resume business again. Now, on the topic of kind of mystical people and fortune tellers, I mean, the first time that we spoke to you, you told us about the Indian gentleman who spoke about Trixie and you having the opportunity to raise her. I'm wondering, aside from that, what other experiences of that nature or with fortune tellers have you had? And did any of them shape the writing of The Forest of Lost Souls?
I have never gone to a fortune teller. We lived across the highway from the county fairground. I was a child and I knew how to sneak onto the grounds without paying. And I do have a criminal side to me, just it hasn't yet expressed itself in homicide. But I did steal from them by not paying for the ticket, which I now confess. And there were palm readers and all kind of fortune tellers over the years, and I always was a little nervous about going in there. I didn't really want to know what my fortune was going to be. I think as a child, that was because I had this violent father who was always threatening to kill us. And I don't know what I'd have done if a fortune teller had said, looking into her crystal ball, and look up at me and say, "Be very careful of your father." Uh, I would have probably wouldn't have coped very well with that. So better not to know if that's going to be your fate. And actually, I think it's better not to know if you're going to be a great success at something you love, because that takes the excitement out of it when it happens. So I don't know. I wish I had really great fortune teller stories to tell you, clever anecdotes about them that would make the entire podcast. But again, I failed you on that regard.
Yeah, well, we didn't brief you to come up with some fortune teller
Mm.
anecdotes, so you are forgiven.
Okay, thank you.
That'd be pretty cool to be, I guess, living to where you could see a carnival come up every once in a while. But I've read Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes too many times. I would probably be like you and not want to go there.
Well, the effect it had on me was I wanted to learn everything about carnies. And I've eventually written a couple books, Twilight Eyes, and another where I made use of all that knowledge that I got. And when I was of a certain age, 12, 13, I had the fantasy of actually running away with a carnival. But carnivals are a very different culture. Uh, and some of it is quite charming, but I suspect that nearly everybody in the carnival are people who don't want to function in the regular world.
Hmm.
Uh, and prefer to be outcasts. And regard the rest of us, this is definitely true, they regard the rest of us as marks. But certain things are kind of charming, like when carnies get married, they do it by riding the carousel. And they get on the carousel together and they ride 3 times around at night after closing. And when they want to get divorced, they get back on it. And in front of other carny witnesses, they ride 3 times backwards. There's no necessity of getting a license or winning a father's approval. And there's something kind of strangely charming about that, even if it is a slightly irresponsible way to be married. But there's all that stuff that I learned that I've made use of, and it is a very singular kind of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would make things a lot easier for marriage and divorce. Just get on the carousel, and there's something beautiful, particularly with the marriage part of that. Although easier to do, so people might not take it as seriously. So
No, I think you've got an insight there. Yeah, it might not be taken as seriously. I suspect there are a lot of riding the carousel backward in most of these people's lives, but there is a bond among carnies that they are a culture and they look out for each other. So there is that, which I think, from everything I've learned about it, may be a bond that they honor more than we do among one another.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, talking about not always taking things seriously, that brings us to your newsletter. And you write a newsletter every month where, that the whole premise is to, of course, sell your books, but then there's about 1,000 words beforehand where you're talking about cookies or something of that nature. And I'm wondering, when did this newsletter come about? Is this something that your publisher forced you to do, as you subtly hint at in every newsletter, or is this actually something you have come up with willingly?
It's when I changed publishers, they said, we will do a newsletter every month, but don't worry, it'll take none of your time. We will write it. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Is this newsletter supposed to come from me? Yes, but it'll be you telling your readers what you have coming next and how much you enjoyed writing it. And I said, no, I can't have that. I know exactly what that kind of newsletter would be. It would be, everything in it would be not at any fault of theirs, just the nature of that kind of thing would be terribly phony. And if I'm going to be said to be addressing my readers directly, then I will write the newsletter. And what I discovered fairly early on in this process was I better make it fun for me. Because otherwise it's going to be a hellish chore and I'm not going to want to do it. And I am going to end up saying, okay, pretend to be me and write it. And I would never have liked that. So some months it's a panic time. What is the topic going to be? I also warned them I would not talk about the book until the very end of the newsletter, because I'm not a guy who does hard sell very well. Actually, I don't think any writers do hard sell very well. They sound rather preposterous when they tell you how brilliant the work is. And I didn't want to be in that trap. So some months I give it to my wife at the same time I'm sending it in, sometimes sooner. And then she comes and tells me whether it was funny or not funny enough or whatever. But generally she likes it. And she finds some months a lot better than other months, but that's the nature of things. But I'm glad you like it and are not insulted. But I always worry But my sense of humor is a little strange, so that there could always be a moment where I alienate half my reading audience. But so far, I don't think that has happened.
But if you do alienate half of them, then in the future, when you go through all of your backlist of books, maybe there'll be fewer. So you got
Yeah,
to look for the positives. This is what we were saying before, looking for the light.
there would be no more hours and hours clearing that backlog of editions. Yes.
Yeah. And talking of the team at Thomas and Mercer, now you dedicate this book to them. You say that working with them has been the most pleasant and inspiring phase of your writing career since you first started writing. Now, I know that we've touched a little on your work with them previously, but to try to go further, I mean, what do you think it is about this phase or this relationship with Thomas and Mercer that makes it so special?
There's a number of things I think I've had to do a lot of thinking about this. Why has this all been so pleasant? And there's been none of the heated moments that you tend to have or the chilly ones. And I think there's several reasons. One, uh, in general New York publishing, uh, at least as it had been through most of my career, it might be somewhat different now. When somebody arises to be the top editor or the publisher, they tend to be of an age. It's unusual for a publisher to be only 50. You'll see publishers are more often of a greater age than that, or they're at least 50. And the editors who've matured into being senior editors have matured into it. And I'm always kind of more lighthearted than almost everybody that I dealt with in New York publishing. And because I always have had this attitude, well, not always, I had to learn that a lot of common wisdom in New York publishing is common but not wise. So when you're expected to do things a certain way because that's how it's always been done, but you don't want to do it because you don't think it's the best way to do it, there can be, let's just say, some moments of confrontation. Well, the first thing I noticed when I went to Thomas and Mercer, an Amazon company, everybody I was dealing with was much younger than the people I dealt with in New York publishing who were in high positions. And I think that there's something to be said for that, to somebody to be in their 30s and be a publisher and a senior editor who are a little more open to change into new ways of doing things. And I think that just connected with the way I write, the fact that they were not so deep into common wisdom of publishing. Then they wanted to make beautiful editions. And I'm a book collector. I collect a number of writers, and some obscure, some not obscure. I have a first edition of the Maltese Falcon in mint condition, a lot of things like that. So I really loved how they used to make books that lasted, that the spines didn't split. They were sewn spines. Or if they were glued rather aggressively. And I liked the days when the books had illustrated end papers, and maybe there was a little something on the boards, a little bit of gilding. And they started doing that with my books, and I can't wait to see what the books look like. And when there's part breaks, they put illustrations in. And when I noticed that they had put, I guess you would call it an engraving on the boards with a little gilding to it as an image from the book. And I said, I can't believe you make the boards decorative. And they said, well, we feel that when somebody buys the book, sometimes they end up tearing the book jacket or they lose it. And we feel it's right that the book sitting on the shelf without a jacket should still look very pretty. Well, this is a kind of attitude that I melt to. And it comes from the days where books were objects of beauty, which you don't see very much anymore. So I think that's one of the things that has kept us on the right side of everything. And also that everybody I work with there has a sense of humor. And that is important to me. I never feel that I cannot make a joke. And my editor can come back at me with something funnier. And I like that. So I think it's been so pleasant. And I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I assume it'll be a big, clunky Frankenstein kind of shoe, and it will probably brain me. But so far, that hasn't happened. I'm willing to think it never will.
Yeah, it sounds remarkable. And I mean, Frankenstein shoes and guns at dawn. You can blink a number of times if you're actually being held hostage, and everything you just said was not was not the truth, because yeah, they've got these methods. But in all seriousness, I mean, yeah, the final book, like, it looks so beautiful, and I love that you've always got the author photo as well in high resolution with your golden retriever, and it just, yeah, I think the aesthetic of the book, it shows the intention and that people are serious about what they do. And I mean, speaking of which, how did the cover art come about for this one, and were you involved in the process?
That's been an unusual thing. Usually, publishers come at you with a cover, and you wince, and if wincing is the worst you do, that's almost a successful cover. And in this one, I've left the cover to them, and they've surprised me to this point by never handing me something, which I've said, oh my God, no. So they've got somebody in the art department there, maybe more than one somebody. I always write back and say, congratulations to the art department. In this case, they said they were going to put forest on it, and they were looking for another item. They didn't have it yet to send me, and so I said, put a wolf on it, but don't make it a werewolf, because these are good wolves in the novel. Don't make it slobbering, but give it that intensity of a wolf. And so they sent it to me, and when I looked at it, they said, it's not finished. We got to put an elaborate background in. I said, no, you don't. This is so spectacular. Just let it be that wolf staring at you. And so that was an easy one. And it's been painless so far.
Yeah, there's something about wolves that, yeah, you have to have a respect for them. They're intimidating, but at the same time, they have this just wondrous beauty about them. And it's such a striking image to have, and so apropos for the book. And I mean, talking about animals and the natural world and having Vida living off the grid, what kind of things did you have to do to get into that mindset? And how much were you researching whilst writing? I mean, we've spoken before that this kind of happens during rather than a massive research before, but I'd love to know about your own experiences with nature and the mental preparation required for this book.
Well, we moved to a new community about 4 years ago, and it's very different than other Southern California communities. It's like we're living in a forest. It's quite beautiful and different, and nature is right here. We see deer in the street. We see coyotes all the time, and coyotes not quite as spectacularly gorgeous as wolves. They have their own canine charm, but they're kind of rangy and strange looking and exude an aura of danger when you see them. And I was going for long walks and running into coyotes that were bold enough to follow you. In other words, stalk you. And so that raises in you a real quality of terror when you're being stalked in your own neighborhood by a coyote. And one morning I walked out to get the mail. It was dark. I had my flashlight. I was walking down the front walk and looked across the street, and there were two coyotes staring at me. And I knew instantly I was breakfast. And so I turned and ran back in the house and said, the mail can wait. The newspaper can wait. It can wait for hours and hours. And my wife has had the same experience. We were told that we got an alert from the neighborhood that there was a mountain lion. At least one had been seen in the community. And in fact, had gone into a shopping center right near here, and it was on the news, racing around the shopping center. It went into a gift shop, I guess, looking for something to buy for an occasion. And the image was of the security man with it brandishing his gun. But the cat was so fast, he would have probably shot a couple of shoppers before he could have drawn aim on the cat. So we're seeing all kind of things here, close up and personal. And, you know, now that you've raised this issue, I realize that's probably unconsciously why I decided I wanted to write Vida with this knowledge of nature and this experience of it, because here I am, not a nature lover. I'm a nature lover. I'm not a nature person that likes to go on hikes, fishing and hunting and all of that. But I do find it sort of fascinating to be living. When we lived as a child, we were in a farming community, and that was not the same. You didn't have the same deer in your backyard or all that sort of thing. And it's kind of weird to be living with it here when just a couple of miles in each direction there's a freeway bracketing us. So, but the land we're in runs as a nature trail all the way out to the mountains so they can get in here. So I think now it's living with it, being terrified by coyotes in the morning, that made me want to set a novel more directly in the forest.
Mm. I've seen a coyote one time years ago, and I did not realize it was a coyote. Though I knew in this area that we don't have wolves unless somebody has, domesticated one. But the first thought was, wow, that's a very small rabid wolf. And they were like, no, that's actually a coyote. And I was like, oh, okay. But because it looked like like you said, they're very rangy. They're smaller, which from what I understand, they can actually get quite large. But the ones around here, that when you get out in the woods and stuff, you can run across one, and they're like, you need to go the other direction, and make sure that you don't leave if you're camping, don't leave any food, because they're going to come after it, and then they know where you're at. So
it's where you live, do you hear them at night when they're hunting and the whole pack is howling in that strange way?
No, I've never been hunting, and this is one of the few forays that I was actually in an outdoorsy type situation. And we actually we stayed in a cabin. It was basically near a lake, and no, that's just not me. So yeah, if I heard that stuff at night, oh man, that would fill my nightmares.
We hear it almost every night because there's a wildland right behind us, but also a golf course. So they come ranging around looking for rabbits and things like that. And when they're out there at night, uh, and they wake you with it, I'll do my little coyote imitation. This is a very poor imitation, but imagine 5 or 6 voices, and they're very high pitched, and they're going, yeah, 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 yeah. And it's very eerie. And once you wake up with it, it's a little hard to get back to sleep. And they'll prowl along the fence at the back of the property. I think they smell the fact that there's a dog that lives here. And they do go after dogs. So it's, when I walk her, when I used to walk her, she's not much of a walker, meaning my dog Elsa. I take pepper spray. And I was walking one morning just after dawn, and I looked up the street ahead of me, and here came a coyote walking straight toward me. And I stopped, and I thought, what do I do? Because it's boldly approaching. So I raised the pepper spray that I had with me and held it out like that. They always say, don't back away. Don't turn your back on them. Back away. And so I had the pepper spray, and it stopped and regarded me very seriously. And I thought, that's good. It knows that I'm not afraid of it. And then it started coming closer again. And then I said, okay, I'm afraid of it. And obviously it knows that. So I didn't back away. I actually took a step toward it, and it stopped. And then decided, and it went away into somebody's driveway. And I couldn't see the whole driveway because of all the shrubs and everything. And I thought, I'm not walking up there because it's probably waiting in the driveway. So I backed a few steps, and then I noticed that all of the shrubbery in their property was moving slowly toward me. And the coyote was making its way toward me undercover. And with great courage, I turned and ran all the way home. And, with looking over my shoulder, broke every rule about how you're supposed to deal with a coyote. But I got away from it. It didn't pursue me. And that was the last time I was walking that early in the morning.
Yeah, that is a terrifying story. You fell into one of your own horror stories there, but thank goodness it worked out okay for you in the end. How far did you have to run? I want to get a sense of the situation as to how far you were from your own house at this point.
Well, it was probably 3/4 of a mile. So it wasn't close, but thank God it was all downhill. The walk to there had been all uphill. Otherwise, the coyote would have, if he'd said, oh, he's got to run uphill, I got that guy. And I would have probably been coyote breakfast. But it's, I used to think they weren't a real threat, but now I know they are. They get used to human beings, and they don't fear us anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot of instances about, animals getting closer to humans. And I mean, we see in Japan, up in Hokkaido, there's a lot of bears, and it feels like every month there's a bear that kind of comes down into the town. Now, I said that it's the animals getting closer to us. Of course, what it really is it's us getting closer and intruding and essentially invading their land, which then ties into the book because, of course, one of the big incidents is the murder of José Nochelobo, which is not really a spoiler. We find out about that early on. He is the partner of Vida, and what he's doing is he's trying to oppose one of these massive developments, which we see all the time, trying to develop on nature and destroying the local environment and wilderness essentially for capitalism, for for corporations and greed. So I mean, what when you were writing about that, you then kind of turned it into a murder investigation as well. So how are you balancing kind of this narrative about the greed of corporations and destroying the natural world whilst also conducting a kind of rogue murder investigation?
Are you saying it didn't quite work and you're wondering?
I'm saying it worked fantastically,
Okay.
and I want tips so that I can do that too with my own work, and one day perhaps have to sort through tens of thousands of books in my own garage.
It's, well, I don't know. I always, I, I, I like characters who have loss in their lives uh, and cope with it. Uh, and it's often within the backstory. But I also knew that Vida was going to have some very bad people coming after her. And that one of them was going to be a law enforcement officer who she's a very attractive person, and he has something he wants, not just a fling, but a long term proposition he wants to make sure. And I knew it was going to be a key thing in the book, uh, and that he had to have something over her to be able to think that he could control her. And that something, of course, had to be, uh, let's say, without giving much away, a disappearance that she had something to do with years before. Uh, and that then sets up the whole mechanism of a murder investigation, that he's doing one essentially and she's doing another. He's trying to find out what happened to somebody he knew, and she's trying to find out what happened to the man she loved. So it's two investigations and being done at the same time. One of the things I find, you always learn interesting things about your readers. I like that I'm learning how vengeful some of my readers can be. They absolutely love what she does to this guy, and it's when I was writing, I thought, boy, this is it's something she needs to do, but it's sort of coldly calculated, and it's fascinating me how many people just love that aspect of the book, and I can't dare talk about it and give something away.
Yeah, I want to talk about it, but at the same time, it's like, goodness, what can I say that won't then zap some of the enjoyment and the impact for people who haven't yet read it? But I'll say with Deputy Nash Deacon, you've created one of the most despicable characters I've ever read, and you know there's some very harrowing, horrendous things, but then because you've set him up to be such a villainous person, let's say some things are very satisfying in the end. And there's a certain scene that's kind of like a game of chess, and he thinks he's being so smart, but maybe there's someone smarter in the room. And I guess we have to leave it at that.
It's well, I won't give. I don't think it's good. Well, maybe no, I won't. It doesn't give anything away in that part. But my editor at one point said, uh, uh, "You've always got to be wary of a woman who owns a heavy-duty earth-moving machine." And I believe that's true. Yes, but that isn't what necessarily the chess game that you're talking about. But that was a great fun scene to figure out how is she going to deal with this, because she is particularly alone now, and there's something creepy about nature when you're alone in it. But she's not creeped out by anything, and it's when we get to the end, I make the point that the real forest of lost souls is not the forest she's in. And I'll leave that to the reader to get there on their own.
Yeah, and the Forest of Lost Souls as a title is such a beautiful title, but there's also something sinister about it. And as I would discover, I mean, the title comes from the final line in the book. And my understanding is that to begin with, and for quite a long time, it didn't have this title. So, I mean, I'd love to know a little bit about that.
Yes, I think I ranged through a number of titles when I was writing it and then settled on one. And at this point, I can't remember which one I settled on, but my editor and publisher said, "We love the book, but the title doesn't make it." And I said, "I know, I just can't seem to hit on the title." So we had one of those exercises where everybody suggests some titles, and none of us were suggesting titles that made us excited. And then I happened to look at the last paragraph of the book and the last line of the book, and I said, "Our title is right there." And it expresses the whole book. It's not just a fun kind of title, but it sums up the theme of it pretty succinctly. Uh, and we all were very delighted by that, because one of the worst exercises is trying to find a title when you can't come up with one. Everything you come up with looks dumber than the one before until you're at title number 500 and contemplating suicide. I've never committed suicide either, so
Finally, it has been confirmed. Is something I've been curious about since we started speaking. Yeah, another exclusive. Because I mean, I don't know, you got a lot of magic tricks. It could be that you're speaking from beyond the grave, but in fact, no, that has not happened.
it, I've had strange experiences in my life, but not that one yet. But if I ever do speak to anyone from beyond the grave, it will be the two of you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, we thought we were honored to be able to chat with you so many times whilst you're living, but this is horror exclusive. We're gonna be able to continue these conversations, fingers crossed, beyond.
Although it may not be such an honor then, that's it depends on what mood I'm in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just got to make sure that I don't say or do anything too outrageous. I don't want the guns at dawn thing. I'm British. I'm living in Japan. We're not equipped to deal with guns.
It's I have. I'll turn this into an interview. What are you in Japan for work, or do you have family there? Or why are
So
you Why are you in Japan?
yeah, so I was originally in Japan because I was just curious to discover another country and another culture, and then I fell in love with the country fairly quickly, and particularly just like the kindness and there's like such a low crime rate here as well, and people are so kind of looking after each other in a kind of collectivist way, and that's before we've even got onto the food and the nature and the beauty. And then some years later, after falling in love with Japan, I fell in love with a woman in Japan, and now we're married. So I'm here. So yeah, that is a very short version of the Japan story. But I just felt that there's more to this world than my little life in the UK. I want to come out and investigate, and then all these things that I guess because I've lived in Japan a few times, and so when I first came back, there were things that I thought, oh, it's a novelty. Like, I can be on the late train going back and not have to really worry about violence or somebody trying to mug me. But then when I'm back in the UK, it's like, well, why shouldn't that be my reality? So I returned to Japan, and yeah, here I am.
Well, I can certainly sympathize when you're talking about the beauty of the culture. My wife and I collect, I don't know if I ever mentioned this, we collect Japanese works of art, Meiji period bronzes
Mm.
uh, and screens, and we have quite a lot of Japanese art in the house. And the other thing we like is Art Deco, and it's strange how Meiji elements in Meiji art predicted Art Deco, and so the two things go together quite well. I'm just totally smitten with Japanese art, and of contemporary as well as the older period, but more of the Meiji because I'm an old-fashioned guy.
Yeah, and I think that everything that the Japanese do, they take very, very seriously. That there's like an art in craftsmanship. So there's almost, I guess, like old school values that actually links a little bit into your book. We didn't mean to, but we've brought it back around because there is this kind of talk about how everything's so disposable these days. Back in the day, if you had an appliance, once something goes wrong, you fix it yourself. But now, even the way things are made, they're made to be thrown away. But with the Japanese, it's a bit of a different story. They're making things to last. They're making things to be beautiful. And then there's even, an art form where if like some pottery or something is broken, then you put it back together and you fuse it with bits of gold, and it becomes even more beautiful than it was originally.
I mentioned those bronzes. There's one of them that sums this up perfectly. It's fairly about this big, and it's a badger in a scholar's robe. And a badger, I'm given to understand, is a symbol of knowledge and of scholarship. And it's a beautiful, attractive piece of work. And if you pick it up and turn it upside down, it's finished on the bottom because you see the feet. It's all flush, but it's the feet of the badger in the folds of the robe he's lying on. I don't think a Western sculptor would ever contemplate finishing the bottom of something that sits on a pedestal and nobody ever picks up to look at. And yet that's the way all of the sculpture we collect is done. And it's just fascinating.
Yeah, I certainly want to see your collection of Japanese sculptures and art sometime. I don't know if that's anything you have photographs readily available of, but it is fascinating.
I believe I have most things photographed. How well they reveal the piece, I don't know. But I, I could send you something if I knew where to send it. Uh,
Yeah, I don't want to give you another task like the wading through the books. It's like otherwise, yeah, then you will be angry with me. There could be some sort of, yeah, guns at dawn, Frankenstein foot. I know you said Frankenstein foot was actually your publisher's, but I think there's a Frankenstein foot somewhere in your house.
Whatever retribution I took upon you, it would be imaginative.
There you go. We've heard it here first, so that is a relief for me, and
Yes,
could
you
be a
also.
relief for some listeners. Those that maybe don't like me, they're like, "Oh, it's only in the imagination." But I know that we're almost out of time. We've got a question from Tracy Kreitz, who would like to know, I have some of your books when you wrote as Lane Nichols. I know that your Dean R. Koontz brought you a lot of success, but I wondered if you wish that pseudonym would have gone further as a second source of success, And what did you like about the Lee books versus the Dean books?
Well, I was writing at a time when I wrote different things, and publishers were so unused to it, and agents, that if I wrote something different, I had to have a pen name for that type of book. And so Lee Nichols came up because the books were probably had an audience bigger for women than men. And they were suspense novels with an element of romance to them and in a sort of Helen McGinnis range. And I've since published them under my name. The Servants of Twilight is one, Shadow Fires is another. And Lee was a hit before I was. Her first book sold 1 million paperbacks, and she was doing quite well. The only thing that I didn't want to keep up with it was to be in the mood to write in it. I felt it necessary to dress like a woman, and I didn't want to do that. So I said, this is a pen name with requirements more than I cared to give it. But in reality, when my own name hit, why would I go on writing under a pen name? You want the glory yourself. And so I got all those books back. I may have told you this story. I was buying books back that I'd written under pen names for as much as I'd gotten from the publisher to write them in the first place. And because I knew there would be renewed value in them. And that publisher said, oh, you don't have to buy them back. They're worthless. I'll give them to you for nothing. And it was the first one of those that I put under my name. Servants of Twilight spent 6 weeks at #1 on the New York Times paperback list and sold 2 million copies in a year. And that was very satisfying, not just for the volume of sales, but for I didn't have to go take revenge against that publisher who said they were worthless. And I do like the idea of revenge, but I didn't have to go take it.
Yeah, I know it's probably in your top 3 of hobbies, and looking after golden retrievers is, of course, #1, but taking revenge upon people could be the #2
Well,
position.
fantasizing revenge, not actually taking it.
That's what you're saying. We'll have to take your word for it for now.
Yes, you will.
But Tracy also wants to know, would you ever write a sequel to Servants of the Twilight?
No, because there's a surprise at the end of that book that some people don't quite get. But after that surprise, there's nothing that follows that wouldn't be kind of tiresome, I think. So, no, I'm done with Lee Nichols. Sold her wardrobe and everything. So.
Yeah, the wardrobe that you said before you didn't actually wear anything from. So this is all very confusing. What is the truth? We'll just have to,
Yes.
come to our own conclusions. But
Sure.
what is truth is not something that we have time for, because we're pretty much out of time now. But as always, this has been a tremendous pleasure and an awful lot of fun chatting with you. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, thanks for letting me into your world again. And I hope I haven't left any soil behind. But you have a great future in Japan and in Texas. Not you in both places. I mean, one of you in Texas and one of you in Japan.
I know this might be a spoiler about technology that was coming in the future, where I could simultaneously be in Japan and Texas at the same time. I mean, technology is advancing very
It's called,
rapidly, and
it's
yeah,
called my location. Yeah, so.
yeah,
Mhm. Yes.
yeah. I guess next time we talk to you, I'll have to prepare more for potential questions you could throw at me, because then I might be able to answer why am I in Japan a little bit better. I didn't know I was being interviewed.
Well, it's a little reverse of the story I I'm friends with a relatively famous musician who married a Japanese woman, but she moved here. So that's a little bit of the reverse, but they're very happy. So I am quite sure you're very happy as well. And I'll rest easier knowing you're very happy.
Well,
It matters a lot to me.
yeah, well, anything I can do to well, not anything, but if I can help you rest easier, then that's great to hear. I'm not gonna murder anyone or take revenge. You can't have me like if you hire someone to murder people, I am not the person. You have made a very bad investment there. But
It sounds like you would have accepted the money, but not fulfilled the assignment. So.
I mean, money can be useful. What can I say? I mean, it's probably not the thing I value the least, but it probably should be. Let's put it like that. And to close out, I mean, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners and viewers with?
No, your question and answering has wrung me dry. I have nothing left in my head.